The once bustling city of New Haven stood silent under a heavy gray sky, a haunting reminder of what life used to be. Buildings, once filled with laughter and the routine hustle of daily life, were now crumbling shells, overtaken by creeping vines and the shadows of decay. The streets were empty, except for the occasional distant groan that echoed eerily between deserted blocks. Among the ruins, a small group of survivors huddled in the remains of a shuttered convenience store. They were the last thread holding on to humanity in a world that had been swallowed by chaos. The air was thick with tension and fear, the kind that seeped deep into their bones every time they dared to step outside. At the center of the group was Marcus, a former firefighter with a hardened jaw and eyes that had seen too much loss. His steady voice was the anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "We need to move before nightfall," he said, scanning the broken windows. "Staying here isn't safe. The dead come out in the dark." Around him were others: Emma, a quick-witted nurse with sharp instincts, Jamal, a teenager whose quiet courage belied his years, and Lila, a resourceful mechanic who had kept their battered truck running through sheer willpower. They had been on the run for days, pushed from one refuge to the next as the infected grew bolder and the living grew desperate. Outside, the low moans grew louder, creeping closer like a tide of death ready to crash upon them. The outbreak had started weeks ago, almost like a bad rumor spreading faster than anyone could contain. No one knew exactly how it began. Some whispered of a virus, others blamed a failed experiment. What was certain was that people were changing. They became something else: relentless, hungry, and terrifying. At first, the government tried to manage it, setting up quarantines and curfews. But it all fell apart too fast. Hospitals were overwhelmed, communication networks failed, and cities turned into battlefields overnight. New Haven was no exception. The dead were everywhere, in the streets, in homes, even in places people once considered safe. Marcus clenched his fists. He remembered the moment he lost his family, the moment everything changed. He had been at the fire station when the call came through about a sudden outbreak downtown. Rushing to help, he found chaos instead of hope. Screams pierced the air, fires raged unchecked, and people he once knew were no longer themselves. The survivors in the store had been lucky to meet each other. Fate had thrown them together, and they'd forged a fragile alliance. Trust was scarce in this new world. The living were as dangerous as the dead. Desperate people did desperate things. Emma adjusted the bandage on Jamal's arm, her hands steady despite the shaking inside. "We'll make it," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The group needed hope, even if it was just a fragile thread. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the silence, the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Everyone froze. Marcus motioned for silence. The groans outside grew louder, mixed now with frantic shuffling. They weren't alone. The door burst open, and a figure stumbled inside, dragging itself along the floor. Its eyes were clouded and lifeless, its skin pale and torn. The first undead had found them. Marcus acted without hesitation. He grabbed a metal pipe from the counter and struck the creature's head, sending it crashing to the floor. But as the body slumped, more came rushing in from the street, drawn by the noise. The survivors scrambled to barricade the entrance. Lila kicked over shelves, creating a makeshift wall, while Jamal grabbed a handful of canned goods, preparing to throw them if needed. Emma checked the small first aid kit, already planning for the worst. Trapped in a crumbling city with the dead pressing in on every side, they realized this was only the beginning. They had to find a way out, to safety, to hope, before the living turned against them or the dead overwhelmed them entirely. Through the broken window, Marcus spotted the flicker of distant lights. It was a signal, maybe other survivors, or a safe zone. But reaching it meant crossing streets crawling with the undead. "We move at first light," Marcus decided, voice firm. "Tonight, we rest and prepare. Tomorrow, we fight for our lives." As darkness deepened, the moans outside never ceased. They were trapped between two worlds, the living, struggling to survive, and the dead, relentless in their pursuit. Every heartbeat was a race against death. And the hardest challenges were still ahead. The first light of dawn filtered weakly through the shattered windows of the convenience store, casting long, trembling shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. The city outside was waking to a grim reality, streets littered with debris, abandoned cars, and the unmistakable signs of the living fleeing in panic. Inside, the survivors stirred from a restless sleep. The night had been long and filled with uneasy silence, punctuated only by the occasional distant groan of the undead prowling outside. Each of them wore the exhaustion of the hunted, their bodies tense and minds alert for any sudden threat. Marcus was the first to rise. His gaze swept across the group, lingering on each face, the tired, the scared, the determined. "It's time," he said quietly. "We have to move. The sooner we get to that signal, the better our chances." Emma gathered what little supplies they had left, a worn backpack, a handful of canned food, a small knife, while Jamal checked his patched-up backpack for any tools that might help. Lila worked to open the battered truck parked just outside, the engine wheezing to life with an agonizing cough. The truck wasn't fast, and it certainly wasn't armored, but it was their best chance for a quick escape. The streets outside were eerily quiet, the silence pressing in on them like a physical weight. Even the undead seemed to be holding back, lurking just beyond sight, waiting. Marcus led the group through broken alleys and shadowed corners, his firefighter training guiding him through the maze of destruction. As they moved, the survivors encountered reminders of what had been lost: a child's toy abandoned on the sidewalk, a cracked photo frame lying in the dirt, a blood-stained note fluttering in the breeze. These fragments of a vanished world fueled their resolve but also threatened to break their spirits. Suddenly, a faint sound caught Marcus's attention: footsteps. Not the shuffling, gurgling steps of the undead, but quick, purposeful human ones. He motioned for the group to freeze, pressing back against a crumbling wall. From around the corner appeared a man, his face obscured by a torn hood, carrying a rifle slung loosely over his shoulder. His eyes were sharp, scanning the streets with cautious intensity. "Hey," Marcus called softly, stepping forward. "We're survivors. We don't want trouble." The stranger lowered his weapon just a little, his gaze wary but not hostile. "Survivors," he repeated. "You've got a long road ahead. This city's no place for the living anymore." Emma stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "We're heading for the signal, the lights. Maybe there's help there." The man nodded slowly. "You're lucky to have found each other. Most people out here are alone, or worse." He hesitated, then added, "Name's Cole. I know a way to get you closer without attracting too much attention. But it's risky." Marcus exchanged looks with the others. They had no better option. "We're listening." Cole led them through back alleys and underground tunnels, remnants of a forgotten subway system long since abandoned. The air was damp and stale, the walls covered in graffiti and the faint, unsettling echo of distant noises. As they descended into the darkness, Emma's heart pounded. She clutched her small knife tightly, every sense on high alert. Jamal followed close behind, his youthful face pale but determined. Lila stayed near Marcus, ready to act if anything went wrong. The tunnels were a stark contrast to the ruined city above, a hidden world where the dead rarely ventured, but danger still lurked in every shadow. They moved quickly but quietly, the only sound their footsteps and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Halfway through, the passage narrowed sharply, forcing them to squeeze through a collapsed section. Lila grunted in frustration but pushed through, her mechanic's strength proving vital. As they regrouped, a sudden noise froze them all, the faint scraping sound of something moving behind them. Marcus turned slowly, heart hammering. In the dim light, shapes began to emerge, undead, drawn to the noise, their dead eyes glowing faintly in the dark. There was no time to run, the tunnels offered little room for escape. "Stick together!" Marcus shouted. Emma pulled out a small flare gun and fired it toward the wall, the flare erupting in a burst of fiery red light that momentarily blinded the creatures. Jamal swung a metal pipe he'd grabbed, fending off the closest attacker. Cole raised his rifle and fired several precise shots, the echoes reverberating through the tunnels. One by one, the undead fell, but more were coming. The survivors' backs pressed against cold stone as they fought desperately for every inch. When the last creature collapsed, silence returned, heavy, suffocating, and broken only by their ragged breaths. "We can't stay here," Cole said grimly. "They'll keep coming." Marcus nodded, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "The signal's close now. If we make it, maybe there's safety." They pressed forward, emerging finally from the tunnels into a deserted park. The early morning sun was just breaking over the horizon, casting a pale glow on the ruined city. Up ahead, the signal's lights flickered, a cluster of torches arranged in an unmistakable pattern. But as they approached, the survivors noticed movement, figures lurking at the edges of the light, not undead, but humans. Armed and watching. Emma whispered, "Not everyone out here is friendly." Marcus's jaw tightened. The living could be just as dangerous as the dead, trapped in this harsh new world. As the group cautiously approached the camp, the real test of trust and survival was only beginning. Trapped between the living and the dead, the survivors knew their toughest challenges were still ahead, but they had no choice but to face them head-on. The flickering torchlight cast long, wavering shadows across the cracked pavement, throwing the faces of the armed group into sharp relief. The survivors, Marcus, Emma, Jamal, Lila, and Cole, stood tense and wary just beyond the circle of light. The humans inside the camp were silent, watching, sizing them up with cold eyes. Marcus took a careful step forward, his voice steady but cautious. "We're looking for safety, and maybe some allies." From the shadows, a woman stepped forward. Her face was hard, marked by years of survival, and her gaze was sharp as steel. "Safety's a luxury these days," she said, voice low and clipped. "Name's Sarah. You got supplies? Weapons? We're not running a charity." Emma swallowed but nodded. "We have some food, medicine, and a few weapons. We're trying to get through the city to a safer zone, the signal lights you might have seen." Sarah studied them for a long moment before waving her hand. "You can come in. But rules are rules. No funny business. Trust is thin." The survivors exchanged uneasy glances but had no choice. They followed Sarah through the entrance, feeling the eyes of the camp's residents on them. Every step seemed to echo with suspicion and unspoken threats. The camp was a cramped cluster of tents and makeshift shelters built from scavenged wood and metal scraps. Fires burned low, casting flickering light on faces gaunt from hunger and fear. People moved cautiously, clutching weapons, anything from rusty knives to worn rifles. Sarah led them to a small tent, offering a place to rest and regroup. "You'll want to talk to my second-in-command, Eric," she said. "He handles security and deals with anyone who might cause trouble." Eric was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running across his cheek. His eyes were sharp but tired. He glanced over the newcomers with a guarded expression. "We've been holding this spot for weeks," Eric said. "Dead are always close. But it's the living that worry me more. Everyone's desperate out there." Marcus nodded grimly. "We've seen that too. But maybe if we work together, there's a chance to survive." That night, around a small fire, the survivors learned more about Sarah's group. They were a band of people who had carved out a fragile sanctuary amid the ruins, farmers, former soldiers, families, all desperate to stay alive. But survival had its cost. Food was scarce, trust was rare, and fear was constant. Stories circulated about betrayals and raids by other groups, some worse than the undead themselves. Jamal listened quietly, absorbing every word. "How do you know the signal is safe?" he asked, eyes wide with concern. Sarah's eyes darkened. "We don't. But hope's all we have. Sometimes you have to take a chance." Emma's nurse instincts kicked in as she noticed several wounded being tended to nearby, some with infections that looked dangerously close to turning. The dead weren't just outside the camp walls, their presence lingered in every whispered cough, every fevered brow. Marcus studied the faces around the fire. Each person carried their own scars, visible or hidden. They were all trapped between two worlds, the living, struggling for a future, and the dead, an ever-present threat. As the fire burned low, the camp's uneasy peace shattered. A scream pierced the night, raw and filled with panic. Everyone sprang to their feet. Sarah grabbed her rifle. "Dead breach," she shouted. From the darkness, shapes emerged, undead, clawing and growling, slipping through a gap in the camp's defenses. Panic rippled through the survivors as they scrambled to fight back. Marcus grabbed a metal pipe and swung fiercely, hitting the nearest creature in the head. Emma shouted orders, helping the wounded retreat to safety. Jamal fought with desperate energy, his every move fueled by fear and adrenaline. Lila fired a pistol she had scavenged earlier, each shot echoing like thunder. The undead pressed harder, overwhelming the outer defenses. Sarah shouted for reinforcements, but the camp was stretched thin. The dead surged closer. Just as hope began to fade, a sudden roar split the chaos. From the far edge of the camp, a group of armed survivors appeared, firing rifles and shouting. The undead, startled and hit, faltered and began to retreat back into the darkness. The camp fought back with renewed strength. The breach was sealed. As the dust settled, Marcus looked around. The cost was clear. Several were injured, some gravely. The survivors' fragile sanctuary had been tested, and barely held. Sarah approached Marcus, her voice grim. "We're not safe here, not really. The dead are getting smarter, or maybe just more desperate. And the living? They're falling apart." Marcus nodded. "We need to move on. The signal's our best hope. But now, it's even more dangerous." The group gathered their things. The camp's uneasy allies watched them leave, some with hope, others with suspicion. As they walked away from the flickering campfires, the survivors felt the weight of their world pressing down on them. They were trapped between the living and the dead, in a land where every shadow could hide death. But the signal still flickered ahead, a promise of something better, or at least something different. The only way forward was through the darkness. And so, they pressed on. The morning fog clung to the ruins like a shroud as Marcus and his group stepped cautiously onto the cracked highway leading out of the camp. The air was heavy, thick with damp and decay, but also charged with the raw tension of every heartbeat. Behind them, the camp's flickering lights disappeared into the mist, swallowed by the city's endless maze of destruction. Ahead, the faint glow of the signal pulsed like a beacon through the haze, a desperate hope for salvation or at least refuge. Marcus glanced back at Emma, whose eyes betrayed exhaustion but also determination. Jamal was silent, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly, while Lila scanned the surroundings with a mechanic's precision, alert for any sign of danger. Cole's steady presence brought a quiet confidence, but even he carried the weight of what lay ahead. They moved swiftly but cautiously. The roads were littered with overturned cars, broken signs, and abandoned belongings, evidence of lives abruptly interrupted. Every corner held potential threats, from the undead lurking in the shadows to other survivors who might not welcome strangers. As they progressed, they spotted a burned-out vehicle near a collapsed overpass. Scraps of paper fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. Marcus crouched to examine the scene. "Looks like a firefight happened here," he murmured. "Maybe survivors, maybe raiders." Emma's eyes scanned the horizon. "We need to keep moving. We can't afford to get caught up." Suddenly, a distant, frantic noise echoed through the fog, a series of sharp, panicked shouts, followed by gunfire. The group froze. "Sounds like trouble," Cole said grimly. "Could be other survivors, or worse." Marcus made a quick decision. "We check it out. Maybe they need help." Moving cautiously toward the noise, they approached a narrow street bordered by wrecked storefronts. The scene was chaotic. Two groups of survivors were engaged in a tense standoff, weapons raised, voices sharp with fear and anger. One group looked exhausted and desperate, armed mostly with scavenged weapons and makeshift armor. The other was younger, more aggressive, wielding rifles and pistols with practiced ease. "Stop!" Marcus called out, stepping into the open with his hands raised. Both sides turned, eyes narrowing suspiciously. The air was thick with tension, a powder keg ready to explode. "We're not here to fight," Marcus said. We're just passing through. A tall man with a scarred face stepped forward from the rifle-armed group. You're lucky. We don't trust strangers these days. Emma added, we heard the gunfire. Is someone hurt? The man's expression hardened. They're thieves. Tried to take our supplies. From the other side, a young woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but defiant. We needed food and medicine. We're not murderers. The standoff wavered on a knife's edge. Marcus knew that in this world, trust was earned with blood and sacrifice. Neither party seemed willing to give the other either. Jamal shifted nervously. This is going to end badly. Suddenly, a guttural roar erupted from a side alley, the unmistakable sound of the undead closing in. The two groups' anger snapped into fear. Guns swung toward the alley just as a horde of the dead spilled into the street, shambling with relentless hunger. Chaos exploded. Marcus barked orders, trying to organize a defense. Emma helped the wounded scramble for cover. Lila grabbed a fallen rifle, firing wildly to keep the horde at bay. Cole moved with practiced efficiency, taking out the closest undead with precise shots. Jamal, overwhelmed but brave, fought alongside the others, his fear fueling his desperate survival instincts. The two survivor groups were forced to unite against the common threat, their earlier hostility dissolving into a frantic struggle for life. After a brutal fight, the undead were pushed back into the alley, their numbers thin but far from eliminated. The survivors stood panting, wounded and shaken, surrounded by the stench of death and fear. Marcus looked at the two groups, their faces pale but alive. We can't keep fighting each other if we want to survive, he said firmly. We have to find a way to work together. The scar-faced man grunted but nodded reluctantly. The young woman looked relieved. Emma added, we're all trapped between the living and the dead. Our strength lies in unity. The group decided to combine forces, sharing what little supplies they had. Plans were made to travel together toward the signal, pooling skills and knowledge to increase their chances. As they rested briefly, Marcus caught a glimpse of a flickering light in the distance, the signal, growing brighter. But even as hope glimmered, he knew the dangers were far from over. The living were unpredictable, the dead relentless, and the line between ally and enemy thinner than ever. As they prepared to move out, a chilling realization settled over Marcus. Surviving in Dead America meant facing threats from all sides, the undead, the desperate living, and the darkness within themselves. The journey ahead would test their courage, loyalty, and sanity. But the signal's light beckoned, a fragile promise of something beyond the endless nightmare. And so, with hearts heavy but resolve steeled, they stepped into the fog, into the unknown. The survivors moved as one through the thickening fog, the eerie silence around them unsettling in a world so accustomed to the groans and snarls of the undead. The signal's faint glow ahead was a guiding star, a fragile hope amid the ruins. But silence was deceptive. It held its own dangers. Marcus tightened his grip on his weapon, eyes darting between broken buildings and shadows that seemed to watch their every move. Emma, beside him, checked her pack, ensuring the medical supplies were still intact. Jamal and Lila scanned the perimeter, every muscle tense. They'd learned that the dead weren't their only threat. The living could be far more dangerous, ruthless scavengers, hostile factions, or worse, those who had lost their minds in the endless nightmare. Hours passed in cautious, whispered steps. The road stretched ahead, cracked and overgrown with weeds, but the city was unnervingly quiet. No distant moans, no gunfire, no chatter, only the occasional rustling of unseen creatures moving in the shadows. As the group crossed a deserted park, Marcus suddenly froze. Ahead, a figure hunched behind a rusted playground slide. "Wait," Marcus hissed, raising a hand. The group slowed to a stop, weapons ready. From the shadows emerged a young man, gaunt and weary, his clothes tattered. His eyes held a desperate mix of fear and hope. "Please," he whispered. "I'm alone. I'm not one of them." Emma stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you? What happened here?" The man's lips trembled. "Name's Eli. My group was attacked last night. Lost everyone. I barely escaped. Marcus idealized suspiciously but nodded. You can come with us, for now. But no tricks. Eli nodded fervently, relief flooding his face. The group pressed on, though the weight of mistrust hung heavy. Night was falling, and the signal ahead flickered brighter. They decided to set up a temporary camp in an abandoned warehouse. It was a precarious shelter, but better than open ground. Inside, shadows danced as fires crackled. Everyone kept their weapons close, eyes scanning every corner. As they settled, strange sounds began to echo, faint tapping, scraping noises from the warehouse walls. Jamal's face paled. Dead inside? Marcus shook his head. No, something else. Lila frowned, her mechanical mind racing. Could be rats, or something worse. The group's nerves tightened. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the tense calm. A pile of crates toppled over in the far corner. Everyone spun toward the noise, weapons raised. But it wasn't the undead. From the shadows, a small group of survivors stumbled in, dirty, exhausted, desperate. Their leader, a fierce-looking woman named Zara, quickly explained their plight. They'd been hiding in the city's subway tunnels but were forced out by flooding and hordes above. Zara's group was wary but agreed to share food and information. They warned of a new threat, not just the dead or hostile humans, but a mysterious illness spreading fast, turning survivors into something worse. People don't just die anymore, Zara said, voice low and harsh. They change, faster than the dead bite. They turn from the inside out. The group exchanged worried glances. Emma stepped forward, her medical training pushing her to ask more questions. Symptoms? How fast? Fever, aggression, then collapse. It's like the virus mutates, Zara said grimly. No cure yet. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The world was becoming even darker, more dangerous. They needed to move quickly. The signal was close, but so was this new terror. That night, as the survivors kept watch, Marcus found himself staring into the darkness, thinking about the fine line they all walked. Between the living, the dead, and those caught in between, trust was fragile. Every decision could mean life or death. And the city around them seemed to whisper warnings, secrets buried in the ruins, dangers lurking in every shadow. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was a battle for humanity itself. Would you like me to continue with part 6? The early dawn filtered weakly through the broken windows of the warehouse, casting long shadows over the weary survivors. Marcus rubbed his face, exhaustion clawing at him, but there was no time for rest. The warning from Zara about the new illness haunted his thoughts like a creeping shadow. We can't linger here, Marcus said, voice low but firm. That sickness could spread through any of us, and if it does, we're done for. Emma nodded, checking the medical supplies again. We need to keep an eye on everyone, symptoms can show quickly. If anyone changes, we deal with it fast. The group packed what they could carry. Zara and her crew joined them, the uneasy alliance cemented by necessity and mutual fear. The next stretch of their journey would take them into the city's underground subway system. It was dangerous, dark, and unpredictable, but it offered cover from the hordes above and a shortcut toward the glowing signal still pulsing faintly on the horizon. As they descended the cracked stairway into the tunnels, a heavy silence enveloped them. The air was damp and cold, smelling of mold and old metal. Jamal shone his flashlight into the darkness ahead, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal rusted rails and abandoned trains. This place feels like a graveyard, he muttered. Lila tapped the side of a broken carriage, listening to the hollow echo beneath. And something else. This place isn't just empty. Their footsteps echoed, bouncing off the tunnel walls, as the survivors pressed forward cautiously. The flickering light from their flashlights revealed graffiti warnings scrawled by previous occupants. Don't trust the shadows, they're below, run if you hear the tapping. Marcus swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if those warnings referred to the undead or the living, or something in between. Suddenly, a distant tapping noise began, rhythmic, unnerving, like fingernails on metal. It grew louder, echoing through the tunnels. The group froze. Stay close, Marcus whispered. Out of the darkness appeared figures, gaunt, pale, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. But these weren't like the shambling undead they had fought before. Their eyes glowed faintly in the flashlight beams, and their movements were swift and deliberate. Zara hissed, "They're the infected, victims of the sickness. They're faster, stronger, more dangerous." The infected lunged forward with terrifying speed. Chaos erupted in the confined space. Gunfire echoed off the tunnel walls as survivors fought desperately to hold back the infected swarm. Marcus fired into the darkness, his heart pounding as figures crashed into them, snarling and snapping with unnatural ferocity. Emma darted between fighters, tending to wounds and shouting warnings. Jamal fought beside her, fear giving way to fierce determination. Lila, using her makeshift tools, smashed infected heads as they closed in, her calm under pressure a beacon of hope. The survivors edged backward toward a stalled train car, using it as a shield. Breathing heavily, Marcus barked orders, "Fall back to the car. Barricade the doors." Together, they shoved debris against the metal doors, blocking the infected from breaking in. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the heavy breathing of the survivors and distant, haunting moans. Marcus looked at the group, bruised, shaken, but alive. "We can't stay here long," he said. "We have to keep moving." Emma scanned the injured. "We've lost a few, and some show early symptoms of the sickness. We need to isolate them." Zara's group moved to create a small quarantine area inside the car. Marcus clenched his fists. The sickness wasn't just a threat outside, it was spreading within their fragile group. The tension between survival and humanity tightened like a noose. Hours later, as they rested uneasily inside the train, the flickering signal light outside grew stronger, a pulsing glow through the cracked tunnel entrance. Hope was close. But so was the darkness. Marcus's eyes met Emma's. "This isn't over. We're just getting deeper into it." Emma nodded. "The hardest part is yet to come." Outside, in the cold night, the city breathed, a silent giant watching as survivors struggled to hold on to their humanity, caught between the living, the dead, and the infected who threatened to consume them all. The journey through dead America was far from over. The dim light of the subway car cast long, shifting shadows on the faces of the survivors. Fatigue was etched into every line, but something more dangerous had begun to take root: doubt. Suspicion. The fragile trust they had fought so hard to build was starting to crack. Marcus sat near the makeshift quarantine zone, watching as Zara and her group debated with Emma about how to handle the infected. The tension was palpable. "We can't keep them here," Zara insisted, her voice sharp. "They'll infect the rest of us. We have to move, now." Emma shook her head. "We're their only hope for help. If we abandon them, we're no better than the monsters outside." Jamal's voice cut through the argument. "And what if one of them turns while we're asleep? We'd all be dead before we know it." Marcus knew the truth was grim. The sickness didn't just threaten individuals, it threatened the group's unity. Fear could unravel them faster than any horde. He stood up. "Enough. We keep watch, we isolate the sick, and no one gets left behind. We survive, together." The group fell into uneasy silence, the weight of Marcus's words settling over them like a cold fog. That night, as the survivors took shifts guarding the train car's entrances, strange noises crept through the tunnels. Faint whispers, soft footsteps, sometimes too quiet to be certain. Lila, on watch near the back of the car, strained to hear beyond the static in the air. Suddenly, a sharp bang echoed from deeper in the tunnel. She signaled the others. "Something's coming." The group gathered, weapons ready. Out of the darkness appeared a figure, a lone man, dirty and ragged, hands raised in surrender. Marcus stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man's eyes darted nervously. "Name's Ray. I've been following the signal. Heard there might be survivors here." Zara's eyes narrowed. "How do we know you're not another threat?" Ray swallowed hard. "I'm just trying to survive. Please. After tense discussion, Marcus allowed Ray into the group, but kept a close watch. Ray brought news. A rival group had been tracking the survivors, intent on taking control of the city's last resources by force. They're ruthless, Ray warned. They won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way. The survivors' unease deepened. It wasn't just the dead or the infected they had to worry about, but the living, desperate and dangerous. Days passed in a fragile routine of travel and vigilance. The sickness claimed a few more victims, forcing heartbreaking decisions. Emma did her best to comfort those who remained, but the shadow of loss was ever present. One evening, while scouting ahead, Jamal discovered fresh tracks, not from the dead, but from human boots. The rival group was close. "We need to move faster," he told Marcus. "They could catch us any moment." Marcus called a meeting. "We're caught between dangers on all sides. We have to prepare for a fight, not just with the dead, but with the living." Zara nodded grimly. "We'll fortify the next safe spot. We make a stand if we have to." The survivors steeled themselves, knowing that the fight for survival was about to become even more brutal. As they pressed onward, the glowing signal ahead pulsed like a heartbeat, a beacon of hope in a city swallowed by decay. But in dead America, hope was a fragile thing, always shadowed by fear and betrayal. The survivors found a fortified building near the edge of the city, an old library with thick stone walls and narrow windows. It was far from perfect, but it offered shelter and a chance to regroup. Marcus led the group inside, the heavy door shutting behind them with a reassuring thud. "We hold here," Marcus declared. "We prepare for what's coming." Zara's group immediately began fortifying the entrances, stacking furniture and debris to block any forced entry. Emma checked on the quarantined infected, her face tight with worry. Every cough, every fever spike was a reminder that their enemy was not just outside but inside, too. Outside, the city was a dark maze of shadows and danger. Jamal and Lila took turns watching from the broken windows, alert for any sign of the rival group or the undead. The tension was thick, each creak or distant sound setting nerves on edge. Late in the afternoon, Ray returned with grim news. "They're coming. The others, the rival group, they've found us." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Too many. They're armed, ruthless. They want everything we have." The survivors prepared for a siege. They gathered what weapons they could, makeshift spears, baseball bats, rusted guns with barely a few bullets left. Every scrap of food and water was accounted for, rationed carefully. Emma moved among them, tending to wounds, calming fears, and reminding everyone that giving up was not an option. Night fell, and the silence was shattered by distant shouting and the pounding of footsteps on cracked pavement. The rival group arrived, their leader a cruel-faced man with a scar running down one cheek. He shouted demands to surrender, or be destroyed. Marcus met the challenge head-on. "We're not giving up. Not now, not ever." The battle was brutal. Shadows clashed with desperate determination as the two groups fought for control of the library. Inside, the survivors used every trick they knew, barricades, traps, and sheer willpower. Jamal's quick reflexes and Lila's engineering skills made them formidable opponents. Zara's group fought like cornered wolves, fierce and unrelenting. Outside, the dead sensed the chaos. Drawn by the noise, the horde began to gather, their moans mixing with the sounds of battle. The living were fighting for their survival, against each other and against the dead. Inside the library, Marcus found himself face to face with the rival leader. Their fight was savage and close, each strike carrying the weight of desperation. But as Marcus gained the upper hand, a sudden crash from above shook the building. The undead had broken through the roof. The survivors' focus split. Now, they had to fend off two enemies at once. Emma shouted orders. "Barricade the stairwell. Protect the injured." The infected in quarantine began to stir, groaning in confusion and pain. Marcus glanced at the flickering signal outside, their only hope, and knew the fight was far from over. As dawn approached, the survivors counted their losses and prepared for what the next day would bring. In dead America, trust was hard-earned and easily broken. Every victory was a battle won, but the war for survival was just beginning. The early light barely touched the broken skyline as the survivors tended to the aftermath of the siege. The library, once a sanctuary, was now a battered fortress scarred by battle. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the sharp sting of loss. Marcus moved through the group, silently counting the cost. Some faces were pale with exhaustion, others wore the heavy mask of grief. A few were gone, taken in the chaos by either the rival group or the relentless undead. Emma knelt by the quarantine zone, her hands trembling as she checked on the infected. Some were worse, fevered, delirious, on the edge of losing themselves to the sickness. "We don't have much time," she whispered. "We have to act before they're beyond saving, or become something else." Tensions ran high. The stress of survival had begun to break the bonds between the survivors. Arguments erupted over decisions: who should lead, who deserved trust, and how far they should go to protect the group. Zara, once a staunch ally, started pushing for more aggressive action. "We can't just hide and wait to die," she argued fiercely. "We need to strike first, take their supplies before they take ours." Marcus shook his head. "That's how people die. We survive by staying smart and careful." But even as they spoke, a shadow moved quietly among them. Ray had been acting strangely for days, disappearing at odd hours, speaking in hushed tones on a cracked radio. No one dared question him directly, but whispers of doubt grew. One evening, Jamal caught Ray sneaking out through a back exit. Following him at a distance, Jamal's heart pounded as he witnessed Ray meeting with a group of armed strangers, the rival faction. Betrayal. Jamal returned to the group, warning Marcus and Emma. "We've been compromised," he said quietly. "Ray's been feeding them information." Marcus felt a cold rage settle deep inside him. The fight was no longer just for survival against the dead, now it was against those who wore the mask of allies. "We need to confront him," Marcus said. "Before it's too late." That night, under the weak light of a dying lamp, Ray was cornered. He didn't deny it. "I did what I had to," he said, voice low. "They promised safety. Supplies. A future. This place is doomed." Zara stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You sold us out to save yourself." Ray's face twisted with regret and fear. "I didn't want to hurt anyone. I thought maybe they could help us." The group was torn. Some wanted to turn Ray away, others demanded harsher justice. Marcus held up his hand. "We don't have time to fight among ourselves. We're all trapped in this nightmare together, for better or worse." But the betrayal had shaken them. Trust was a fragile thread, and now it threatened to snap. Meanwhile, outside the battered library, the undead were gathering in greater numbers. The noise of the previous night's battle had drawn more to the scene, hungry for anything left alive. From the shattered windows, Marcus watched the slow, relentless tide. "We're running out of time," he said grimly. "If we don't move soon, we'll be buried here." Emma gathered the survivors for a final plan. "We leave at first light," she said. "We take what we can carry and make for the signal source. It's our only chance." The survivors packed what little they could, weapons, food, and the few supplies left untouched. The sick were helped to their feet or carried, every step heavy with uncertainty. Marcus looked at the faces around him, some broken, some determined, all fighting to survive. The city outside was no longer a place they could call home. It was a battleground, a graveyard, a test of their humanity. As dawn broke, the survivors stepped out into the uncertain light. Behind them, the library loomed, a scar on the city's face and a symbol of their survival. Ahead lay danger, the rival group, the infected, the undead. But also hope. Because even trapped between the living and the dead, they were still alive. And that was a fight worth winning. "Would you like me to prepare the final part 10 for you now?" The survivors moved cautiously through the ruins of dead America, every shadow a threat, every sound a potential warning. The weight of loss pressed down on them, but their resolve burned brighter than ever. They were not just fighting to survive, they were fighting to live. Marcus led the group with steady determination, glancing behind now and then to see Zara helping the injured, Emma comforting the frightened, and Jamal scouting ahead. Ray, the traitor-turned-uneasy ally, stayed silent, his guilt etched deep on his face. But now, there was no time for past mistakes. Only the future mattered. Ahead, the flickering beacon of the signal pulsed through the foggy morning. The source of hope, perhaps salvation, was close. But so was danger. Suddenly, a shrill alarm echoed through the empty streets. Jamal's sharp eyes caught movement, the rival group, faster and more numerous than before, blocking the survivors' path. "There's no way around," Jamal warned. "They've set a trap." Marcus took a deep breath. "We make our stand here." The survivors prepared for the final battle, the last test of everything they had endured. Weapons were readied, positions taken. Emma handed out makeshift shields, Zara rallied the fighters, and Marcus stood at the center, steady and fearless. "This is it," he said, voice low but firm. "We fight not just for survival, but for a future. For every life lost and every hope still alive." The rival group charged, ruthless and violent, but the survivors met them with fierce resistance. Every strike, every dodge, every cry was a testament to their will to live. The undead, drawn by the chaos, swarmed the outskirts, creating a living nightmare from which there was no easy escape. In the thick of the fight, Marcus found himself face to face again with the rival leader, a brutal, merciless opponent. Their battle was fierce, echoing the struggle of all the survivors, a fight not just for territory, but for the right to hope. With a final push fueled by desperation and courage, Marcus overpowered the rival leader, forcing him to retreat. The survivors, battered but unbroken, held their ground as the rival faction withdrew. But the battle had taken its toll. Many were wounded, and supplies were dangerously low. Emma hurried to tend the injured, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Zara surveyed the fallen and the living, her face grim but proud. With the rival group defeated, the survivors turned their attention to the flickering beacon. It came from an old radio tower, still somehow powered, sending out a steady signal of hope and connection. Marcus approached the equipment, adjusting dials with trembling fingers. "This signal, it means others are out there," he said. "We're not alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness. The survivors gathered close, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Together, they had faced the living and the dead, betrayal and fear, and had come through stronger. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready. Because even trapped between worlds, humanity could survive. As the sun rose higher over dead America, the survivors looked to the horizon, a new beginning waiting to be claimed. And they would face it, together. Would you like me to help you with anything else related to this story or another title?